In the world of medicine, where every decision can change lives, your peace of mind is crucial. This is where Pattern steps in. Imagine insurance made simple, fast, and personalized, just for you. With Pattern, you're not just getting disability and life insurance, you're insuring your future and protecting your greatest asset, your income. In the past 10 years, Pattern has transformed the way over 20,000 doctors secure their financial well-being. Discover the simplicity of securing your future at patternlife.com or click the link in the description. On today's episode, we're talking about side hustles, how to start them, how to leverage your expertise, what side hustles are out there that we haven't really thought about, and how to outsource so that you're using your time valuably. Check it out. Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. So on today's episode, we have Nick Loper, who has a huge following. So I was really impressed that he was willing to do the show. So this is a great one for anyone out there who's considering a side hustle, because he is the king of the side hustle. So first, let's establish who he is. So Nick Loper helps people earn money outside of their day job. He's an author, online entrepreneur, and host of the award-winning Side Hustle Show podcast, which features new part-time business ideas each week. And as the chief side hustler at sidehustlenation.com, he loves deconstructing the tactics and strategies behind building extra income streams. So for all the physicians out there interested, and for my listeners, that's you guys, you're definitely going to want to listen to this one. So Nick Loper, thank you so much for taking the time and being on the podcast.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So let's start off. What's the difference between a hobby and a side hustle, right? Like, I know the government has the difference between the two, right? You can't like collect stamps and deduct like the trade shows you go to for stamp collecting, but you can, if you go to a side hustle type event, you can deduct if you establish you're trying to earn money with. It's like a genuine business. So, but for you, what makes the difference between the two?
What's the IRS rule? You could run at a loss for 5 years or something before they say like, sorry, sir, that's a hobby. That's not a business. Exactly. I think as long as you could document like intent to earn profit down the road from something, like, hey, I'm going to like the
exactly.
one.
I don't think Uber's been profitable yet, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
They've been out there for a while.
More profitable than Uber. Yes, even if I'm making $0. The one my wife and I always talk about is like, well, should we start like a travel YouTube channel, just like to be able to write off trips or something? And it's like, we intended to monetize this. It just maybe didn't happen on the timeline that we had hoped. But more generally speaking, like, okay, hobbies, fun things that you do in your spare time, we can all check that box. Side hustles, like a thing that you do in your spare time with some entrepreneurial upside, call it. And maybe that's the distinction between like a second job, like, bartending at night or delivering pizzas or even like driving for Uber. Like, I'd probably bucket that under the side hustle umbrella, but there's typically a more entrepreneurial connotation. Like, this could be a thing that has some legs and leverage to it that is beyond just trading hours for dollars, if that makes sense.
You're trying to build something. Although I would argue if you're driving for Uber, you are putting the hustle inside hustle, right? There's a lot of hustle happening there. But yeah, to your point, like, you're trying to build something bigger than just clocking in the hours and clocking out.
Yeah. And apps like that have provided a really kind of a cool stopgap for people who, short term, I need something to make extra money, like relatively low overhead, relatively quickly. It's like kind of a plug and play option. The drawback is, it's a skill that almost everybody has. So there's this natural downward pressure on how much you can earn there. You're putting wear and tear on your car. You're trading a lot of time. You're sitting for a lot of that time. Not the most healthy thing in the world. So pros and cons to an approach like that for sure.
Yeah. So, there are a lot of side hustles out there for physicians, and some of the most popular ones, we've got real estate, coaching, expert witness work. Some people are getting into healthcare consulting. So those are probably the most popular ones out there. But you've heard a lot, right? You've got a ton of episodes. So can you think of any that we might be missing out on that weren't on that list, where we can really leverage like our expertise and our education and our position?
Yeah, a couple come to mind because that's the challenge. You're dealing with, high earners with limited time. It's like, a lot of it centers around investing and like, well, how do I take the money that I earn today and have it put it to work for me? So so I can, turn $1 into several dollars down the road.
Yeah.
So a lot of it centers around investing. But the couple that come to mind, one is on like the content creation game. Like you're doing the podcast, we've seen others, like Dr. Mike is probably like the most prevalent example. Like,
yeah.
But, becoming a content creator, becoming a pseudo influencer, but like helping people, answering their questions on YouTube. And it could come with the disclaimer, look, I am a doctor, but I'm not your doctor. So take it with a grain of salt.
And that's what kills me, because we have all these people that are like essentially making stuff up. They're like, seed oils are bad for you. And really like, there might be a tiny grain of truth, but they're fear mongering. And they don't have to qualify that with like, I'm not your doctor. Like they don't qualify it at all. They're giving misinformation. And yet we're always like terrified. We're going to get sued for giving you information.
Yeah. Like we see it in the personal finance space too. Like the people who have, the letters behind their name, like there's really strict regulations on what they can and can't say online.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, any millennial who had a good year in the stock market is like, hey, follow me. But the content creation angle is one that I really like. A friend of mine, Dr. Ryan Gray, runs this whole suite of podcasts under the med school HQ. I think medicalschoolhq.net, I think is his primary site. But, kind of targeting, pre-med up to like non-traditional med students, amazing. I'm like, dude, do you still host like 7 or 8 podcasts? It's like, oh yeah, got to keep that content machine churning.
Yeah.
But he was doing kind of like high-end admissions consulting for a while. And then I think he turned around and built this pre-med, admissions roadmap software called Mapped, and just plug in all your classes and coursework. Like, here's the gaps and what you need to do next. And, if you're going to apply to these schools, here's your, kind of progression and path. And it's done really well with that. So that's kind of an example. Like, there are lots of people who want to go the same route that you've already gone. And if you can help them, especially even just like on the admissions process, because like, if that's MCAT tutoring, if that's, essay, just admissions guidelines and stuff, helping people go through that process could be, several $1,000s per client.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And, what I'm doing right now is physician facing, but we can do content that's patient facing, right? As physicians, what do? We see the same things every day over and over. And so we can, ad lib a whole bunch of information, health information that we say to patients all the time. And all we need to do is record that, and we're creating content. And then we can leverage that content as like patient-facing information as well. And either to grow our businesses as physicians or somehow monetize that and us as experts.
Yeah, you have this instant built-in credibility when you can start off your video by saying, look, so-and-so MD. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, I'm paying attention to this person versus some rando I found on TikTok. And so much of YouTube is driven by that keyword search intent. Like people, how do I fix my shoulder pain, or like something super specific, where if you can lead with authority and expertise and help people, like, you can drive a lot of views, eventually a lot of ad dollars through kind of search and intent discovery like that. We've seen some examples, not in the medical space, but in like the software, Q&A space, like how to do blank in Microsoft Teams, or how to solve, how to do this in Asana or whatever. And just like, hey, you can even introduce yourself. I'm a so-and-so consultant, and this is, how to solve this problem. And you find a lot of really highly targeted search traffic for something like that, and pretty engaged if you can solve their problem in a real and authoritative way.
Something I remember from a healthcare marketer that we had interviewed, I think like a year ago, there was this gap between the way physicians talk about problems and the way patients look them up. And it was patients look it up by symptoms, and doctors tend to categorize that information by diagnosis. So when their patients are, this for search engine optimization, you have to come up the way that they're looking it up, not the way you want to present the data. And so, categorizing things by symptoms, which is how they look it up, rather than diagnosis, is, I think, a good way to for you to be the one to pop up in their searches rather than someone else.
Yeah. You can look at, I think it's still Answer the Public is kind of this fun research tool where if you type in like shoulder pain, it will give you like all of the who, what, when, where, how questions that people are asking about shoulder pain to start to kind of brainstorm different topics that you might be able to create something about.
Sorry, what is that?
It's called
Answer the Public?
Answer the Public. It might have gotten bought by somebody, but I think the core functionality is still there. It's pretty interesting to see what kind of questions are people are typing in. It's like when I do it for side hustles, it's like, what are the best side hustles? What are the passive income side hustles? How do side hustle taxes work? Just kind of different variations of questions on this topic.
I think even Google, just type in shoulder pain and see what comes up when you type it in.
Yeah,
and that's clearly what people are looking up.
The auto-populate.
Yeah. Anything else before we move on that can leverage our position and expertise?
Well, the other angle is like trying to think of like high dollar per hour value stuff. And tutoring is the other one that comes to mind, where seeing people in the $90, $100, $150 an hour, especially for test prep tutoring, where it's really worthwhile because it's such high stakes for people to make sure they're putting their best foot forward on that stuff.
Great ideas. Thank you. So what about, let's say we're pivoting into either coaching or, content creation, and, I don't know anything. For instance, myself, I don't edit my podcast. I have someone who does an amazing job. Clearly. Thank you, Nathan. He's listening, clearly. Mm-hmm. And so I tend to outsource. I'm a big fan of outsourcing because, listen, we do well when we're in the office seeing patients or in the operating room. And so our time is best spent either in there or doing whatever it is that nobody else can do when it comes to the side hustle. But some of us might be reluctant to outsource and let go. So do you have any tips for outsourcing the side hustle without draining the bank and making it, one of those 5-year projects where you're never actually making money?
Yeah, you bring up a great example. Like doctors are great at this, dentists are great at this, where it's like the receptionist is doing the appointment scheduling and somebody else is handling the insurance billing, and the hygienist is handling like the initial cleaning. Like the dentist is hiding in the back, like only doing the final exam checkup and like the root canal stuff. It's, he's outsourced every other little bit of the operation. And I think you kind of take that on a smaller scale with whatever business you're running. Like, what is the secret sauce that I'm bringing to the table, and how can I peel back and delegate other aspects of that? Now, I am the person who said, okay, I want to do the thing first, and then I can create the process, create the recipe, and then try and delegate it. Because it's a little bit more challenging to find. I mean, the example of like hardcore software development is like, well, I'm not going to take the time to necessarily learn how to do that. And so like, okay, that's type 2 outsourcing. But type 1 is where I'm going to start out doing the thing myself. I can create the process documentation. I can go find somebody to help out with that. What I tend to do is this kind of like time tracking audit of, where I'm trying to just be honest, like where my hours really are going, and then working through kind of an elimination, automation, delegation framework. Is this something that could be, does this drive results at all? Like, if not, okay, maybe I should eliminate it. If it does, could it be automated in some way, even just pieces of that process? And then ultimately, like, is this something that somebody else could do better, faster, cheaper than I could? And can I start to play the delegation game?
Okay. I love that. Elimination, automation, delegation. And so you go through each one stepwise. It's great to have a system like that. And so, sorry, go ahead.
It was just years, and I still suck at, like, I have a hard time letting go. And I was talking with a friend of mine today, like, well, I want to, step out of the weeds of, blog writing. It's like, well, you could hire somebody, but if they're any good, they're going to charge you $350 a post. I'm like, dang, what's even like the break-even ROI on that? If and when it ranks, and how many page views is it going to take to, it's almost playing like mini, content venture capitalist where, hopefully one of these hits and erases all the other expenses. But it can be difficult, especially if the revenue isn't there to justify it just yet.
Right. Or like having AI write your blog posts. I tried that, and it was, how verbose AI is. So it ended up being really long and completely missed the point of the podcast. Like, you can run your RSS feed through like an AI, and then it just writes a blog post based on it. But it's like, and I know you can modify it and modify it and modify it, and it didn't take the time to do that. But still, I feel like there's something disingenuous about, having AI write the blog post, right? And then having AI write comments on LinkedIn. And then AIs replying to the comments on LinkedIn. Like we're just cutting ourselves out of it. It gets ridiculous.
Becomes a weird cycle, weird circle. And in the medical field, it's just blatantly making stuff up too. So you got to be really careful with what you're copying and pasting from GPT.
I mean, you do need to vet it. Yeah, definitely. Leading a medical practice is challenging. There can be reimbursement changes, referral slowdowns, staff turnover, or drama. There are obstacles in the way of achieving your goals, or maybe it feels like you've hit a plateau. Who can you turn to for help with the business of managing a medical practice? The Physician Growth Accelerator, a private practice partner that helps you uncover and overcome constraints in your practice. They will check your business vitals, identify the root cause of what's restricting your growth, prescribe what to do about it, and help you achieve it, just like we do with our patients. Imagine your practice, where stress is reduced, profits increase in both patients and staff, and you are happier. They've been making that vision a reality for over a decade. Isn't it time your practice thrived? Discover how at physiciangrowthaccelerator.com. What are some of the habits that you've developed? And I know you said you're a work in progress and working on letting go, but some of the more habits that you have to growing a side hustle.
I mean, I think the biggest thing is kind of a bias toward action and saying, okay, I'm going to set a near-term deadline for myself to launch this thing. Because if you kind of punt it out indefinitely, it's super easy to say, well, I'm never going to have the uninterrupted 72-hour block of time to, really crank on this thing. So how can I break that up into more digestible, actionable baby steps so I can make progress, even if I only have 10, 15, 30 minutes at a time? Like, okay, I feel like I'm moving the ball forward. I'm making some progress. And then the other thing is just trying to, sorry, I lost where I was going. So
breaking it, why we have Nathan.
Yeah. Breaking it down into small pieces, making consistent progress, and just giving yourself that near-term deadline to make it real. Because I find I tend to work better in like short-term project sprints, 3 to 4 week projects versus, hey, this is my big, 12-month long goal. So I tend to work better in short-term sprints. We can dive deeper on that stuff, but I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, please, because I can't hold myself to those deadlines, right? Like if I tell myself I'm going to do it by X, there are no stakes if I don't do it. So then how do you get yourself to actually follow those deadlines?
Yeah, so all my deadlines are self-imposed with the exception of, advertisers on the podcast. Like all the, rain or shine, every Thursday the episode is coming out, but everything else is pretty fluid. So it's just, 15 years of working from home at this point. It's like the buck stops here. Sometimes you have items that sit on the list for, weeks at a time. Like, why isn't that getting done? Well, you got to look in the mirror. It's on you to get it done, or at least you find some help in getting that done or breaking that down into some smaller chunk that you can get it done. I guess I'm fortunate that have been pretty self-motivated, but also, I don't know, operating with some grace and forgiveness when things don't happen in the timeline. Because it inevitably takes longer than you want it to, than you expect it to, than you'd like it to. And it's just, okay. But, trying to be consistent with it. If you are, you kind of treat it, you like dedicate some time to it, carve it out, block it off in your calendar. That seems to be, one of the differentiating factors between the people. Like they treat it like work. They treat it like a business, and like, okay, I'm going to take it seriously.
Yeah. Giving I like that. Blocking out some time on your calendar then obligates you to use that time. It's like, all right, I'm not going to be seeing patients this afternoon because I'm going to be working on the podcast or the blog or the real estate or whatever. And like now I've given up that revenue, so I better make it worth my while to do that thing and build that business. Like it obligates you to do it if you carve out some time in your calendar.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. And in most cases, you're going to have most control over like the bookends of your days, first thing in the morning, last thing before bed, before, it's putting out fires mode and reacting to whatever the world throws at you that day.
Yeah.
But if you can be consistent about that, and even if it's just half an hour, you find that it does start to build some momentum. You try and, make some incremental gains.
Yeah. Chunk here and a chunk there. You don't need to be, what's his name? Jocko Willink waking up at like 4 o'clock in the morning and taking a cold shower and then working on your blog for 4 hours before anyone wakes up. Like, little working on the margins, a little half an hour here, a little half an hour there is enough. Yeah, I like that.
The way, and that works for some people. Some people like have to, have that, totally quiet, uninterrupted time. We talked to other business builders who, were moms with kids at home, and they're just, I look for the cracks in my days. Maybe it's 15 minutes here. Maybe they found a quiet activity here. Like, okay, I'm going to go work on this blog post or something like it. But having in mind, and this is what I'll do on a nightly basis, is just writing down my top 3 priorities for the next day. So I know when the time comes, like, it's not just like,
yes,
let's fire up email. Let's see what social media has in store for me. It's like, no, I know exactly what I'm supposed to work on and in what order when the time comes.
So that's one thing we're really good at in medicine. Triage, in physicians, we have to triage all the time. Like, what's the most important thing? What's the pressing thing? Like when we were all residents and we had to round and like with this list of 30 things that we needed to do, we had to prioritize them. Sometimes I wouldn't prioritize them so well. I would do the easiest thing first, just because it felt so good to check things off the list, but making sure it's the most pressing thing that needs to happen first and then going from there. So we've carved out some time, you're finding some cracks, and you're making your short list of what needs to happen, and you're doing it in order. That sounds like a good way to move that boulder up the hill.
And you may find as you get going with a side hustle, like the bottom 20% of those tasks, like may not even be important enough to get done. Maybe those are on the elimination chopping block. And, a friend of mine, kind of described it this way. Like if you are really religious about only doing the things that drive revenue or drive growth, and you kind of ignore everything else intentionally, you can't help but grow. And then at a certain point, you're like, okay, well, now I can hire people. If that stuff was really important, probably wasn't, because I got to wherever I am without doing it. But if it's really important, okay, now I can probably afford to hire somebody to do that stuff.
Yeah. You're still putting out the content. It's still happening and it's still growing. And if those things become important later, then they'll become important and they'll make it back to the top of your list. Yeah, it'll just happen organically. Kind of back to the topic of different side hustles that you've seen, and you might not have an answer for this because I'm kind of asking you to get in our heads. Would you have any advice for physicians? Because I know a lot of these who are mid-career, having this mid-career existential crisis, and they're looking for a side hustle with both meaning and fulfillment, right? You'd think being a physician is fulfilling enough, but it becomes everything, hedonic adaptation. It gets monotonous. And so, anything that you've heard of that might be some ideas for us.
Here, like my advice would be to kind of follow your curiosity and what excites you. And that's what's driven the Side Hustle show and the website for the last 10 years. My best performing content started from a place of curiosity. Like I went to do some focus group in San Francisco, and it was about like air travel with kids or something. And it was like legit, like one-way mirror on the wall. And then afterwards, they paid me $150. I was like, that was like the easiest $150 I ever made. I wonder what other companies, do paid market research like that. So come home, do the research, and then came up with this blog post, one of the top performing posts on the site. And similarly, like that's what drives the show as well. So leaning into, curiosity. Some guests have phrased it as like paying attention to what wants to happen. We had a friend of mine was an electrical engineer on the show. And he's like, yeah, I was supposed to be doing my engineering work, or I was supposed to be doing web development for, freelance clients, but I couldn't ignore that piano in the corner. And so he ended up creating this piano course. He sold like $4 million worth of this online piano, the course over the last 10 years. It's just paying attention to what wants to happen. I think that's
what really delights you. What delight? Yeah. I had someone on the show a while ago. He's a physician. He's a business person. And we were talking about networking, and he said, go to events of stuff that you're just interested in. Like, even if it's not related to medicine, it could have nothing to do with medicine. Like he went to an AI conference. Now there's certainly plenty of AI in healthcare. Yeah. And then, ended up making some business connections from that. Just like what interests you and what delights you. And even if it has nothing to do with your main occupation, and then see what can happen.
Yeah. I'll give you the example of my wife, who's a mechanical engineer, but was always, dinking around with photography stuff on the side. Like her and her friend start this wedding photography business. They have no portfolio aside from random family photos. They have no clients, And so they start out pricing super, super cheap, like, in photography portfolio cells. And so it's like, well, hey, it's kind of a chicken or the egg problem. Like, you're going to take a risk with us on your wedding day, Mr. and Mrs., happily married couple or newlywed couple. And that's why we're doing it so cheap. But like, they found a match and kind of continually scaled up their pricing and client base since then. And it's just, leaning into, kind of what you already like to do. But the other key piece of that is like, well, if you like underwater basket weaving, like, great, maybe you could build a business around that. But like, you're trying to pair that with, a pain or a need in the market. You got to find that overlap. Otherwise, it's just, you're in the hobby zone.
And then we also have the other pressure of, if you're doing it to try and replace or supplement your physician salary, right? You're already a high earner. And so underwater basket weaving, you might sell a couple of baskets, but you're not going to be selling them for $50,000 a piece. So it's not necessarily going to, so it should be, in that realm,
that's a tricky
it
one.
might end up being more of a hobby, or if you can make a little bit, a way to deduct your basket weaving supplies.
There you go. It's
just the tax advantage.
It's a really interesting situation, like being in a high earning field, because you almost get to that golden handcuff point where you're like, well, I've grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle here and a certain level of income, and it can be tough to replace, especially in a brand new field.
Yes. So are there any common themes that you've noticed in the people that you interview that have been successful at their side hustles? Anything either about their personalities or their approach?
Yeah, a couple of things. The first is more Side Hustle Show guests have started with a service-based business than any other, which does not check the boxes of, passive income, or, it's not as glamorous as some of these other models, but it's because it's still time for money. And there are ways around that. Like, you could price really high. You could, go for an agency model where it's not, you're just kind of like playing matchmaker between other people doing the work. We had, online, offline, we had people doing this in design. Like, I built this huge design business. I sucked at design. It was about playing matchmaker with people who needed consistent design work. I go find good designers. And even like in offline, it was like cleaning business, where it's like, I was reading the Yelp reviews, and, nobody complained about the like the 2 and 3 star reviews for like cleaning companies. Nobody complained about the cleaning. They complained about like the office admin. I couldn't get a hold of anybody. It was impossible to get a quote. I never knew when they were going to show up. Like, oh, shoot, I could be a better administrator. I could be a better marketer. So stuff like that is really funny, like on the service side to me. And I, just broadly speaking, huge opportunity in those local, blue collar type of services. The entrenched competition is in a lot of cases aging out. Not a lot of people going into the trades. Like, how do you tap into that? Especially like very fragmented market. There's no dominant, regional or national player that has like a huge chunk of the market share. It's like, okay, how can you add your own like branding layer to that and be a better
build and scale? And that's, you're right. That's the common complaint. Happens with us physicians as well. We're working on it, but like contractors, right? All sorts of contractors, like they didn't call me back. Like they, I'm thrilled when they call me back, and I never know when they're going to show up. So all you need to do is you sort for that. You sort for that, and you can build a business.
Yeah.
We're making it sound easy, but
years of blocking and tackling and doing all the right things, and you could build a business. But it's like, that's kind of how it starts with one customer, right? So that's one thing, is the kind of this, starting with service in most cases. And then, maybe that leads to an agency model. Maybe that leads to a digital product or a software product down the road as you kind of get to know this customer base, more intimately. And then you can kind of find, okay, what path do I go from here after I learned, some of the basic skills of like selling and, fulfillment and all that jazz. The other thing that really stands out from years and years of Side Hustle Show guests is this experimenter's mindset. And I had read somewhere that at any given point, Amazon is testing, 1,000 different variables or something on their website, like trying to eke out that next like 0.1%, conversion rate improvement. How do we make more sales? I think we can adopt the same mentality on a smaller scale. And whether it's, okay, I'm going to try this out for the next 30 days. I'm going to see what I like, what I don't like, or I'm going to block off that half hour on my calendar. I'm going to see what kind of progress I can make. And I'm not even going to think about it until that, deadline is up. And then I can evaluate, was that worthwhile? Did I want to try something else? But like positioning it in your mind as an experiment, it lessens the sting of the failures that come along the way. It's not, I need to make this work or else I suck. It's, hey, I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to put on my scientist lab coat, and you're probably familiar with that, and, see what kind of results it gets.
That's what I've been doing on the podcast. Actually, I've been doing it for like 5.5 years now, and I'm still trying to find a way to build it into a business. And I've worked with different people, and I've tried different rates of, releasing episodes, in different social media, ways. So it's, the way I see it is like, it's an iterative process. And if it works, I stick with it. And if it doesn't work, then I change. But I ultimately, what's at its core, and I hope it comes out in the way I do it, is I just enjoy doing it. I enjoy doing the podcast for its own sake. Now, it'd be nice to be able to build it into a business. And if that works out, then great. But if it doesn't work, I still love doing that. So I guess it's kind of straddling hobby and side hustle with this. We won't tell the IRS because I am trying to build it. I have an LLC. I'm trying to build it into a business. So I think that for me, that's what it's core, but it's iterative. Like, I think that's
really
right?
Powerful. Yeah. And there's this, Tim Ferriss line about, when starting any new thing, is like, well, how do I position it such that it's a win, even if I lose, or even if it doesn't, even if it's not a home run monetarily, what skills am I going to learn? What people am I going to meet? Like, is this going to be fun, rewarding, fulfilling, even if it doesn't, make $1 million?
Yeah. I am, because of this, a better dad, a better partner, a better boss, a better physician, because of doing the podcast. Now, I am in the red quite a bit because of this labor of love, but, hopefully we'll turn it into something eventually. And hopefully those listeners will be able to take a lot of this information and help them build whatever it is that they want to build, either for an income stream or just for the love of it. So Nick Loper, thank you so much for the time. Thank you so much for the interview. And for those out there who want to check out his stuff, it's incredible. Side Hustle Show podcast on all your podcast players, or sidehustlenation.com for his website. And anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Yeah, those are the best places to follow along, and always happy to geek out on podcasting, podcast growth, podcast marketing. We can chat about all that stuff. We'll see if we can get you closer to revenue positive here.
That'd be great. All right. We'll find out if it works. Thanks a lot, Nick. Doctors dedicate our lives to caring for others. It's time someone took care of us. Visit patternlife.com to simplify your path to peace of mind. Patternlife.com, simplifying your insurance journey. Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it, or like it, or comment on a social media post, or write us a 5-star review. Something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee, and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you. This is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice, or financial advice, or really any advice. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.